It's great to see so many people who were here at our founding and who have been with us through the good times and through the not so good times. It's hard to believe that PCIJ is now 25 years old. It's hard to believe considering when we started we had no staff, no money, no office, not even a telephone. And now we have our own office. It's really incredible. And thank you to Manu and to the rest of the PCIJ staff. I would like really to celebrate this milestone with you and to show PCIJ in some sort of global context. We were the second, or maybe the third, it's still contested, two non-profit investigative reporting centers in the world were set up in 1989. We were one of them. So we were either the second or the third non-profit investigative reporting center in the world. Today there are over 100. We were certainly one of the first. We're pioneers not only in this country but around the world. We're certainly the first in Asia and the first in the developing world. And we're the first and still one of the few investigative reporting centers around the world that's mainly run by women. We're certainly among the first investigative reporting nonprofit to help topple a government and a president. We've pioneered in the use of data and documents. We've been engaged in broader issues, including issues of governance, freedom of information, and the protection of journalists. We are a model for the Philippines and for the developing and developed world. We have illustrious alumni, people who work with us, who are now in very high positions where they can influence the direction of Filipino journalism. Our proudest achievement has been the introduction of a culture and the beginning of a tradition of in-depth investigative reporting in the Philippines. I think it's customary in anniversaries, let's see if I can get this clicker to work, to where's that? Maybe it's Bobby Tiglao. The Bobby Tiglao is coming on horseback. It's customary in anniversaries to sort of replay the creation myth. So this is my version of the creation myth. Snow malakas and maganda here. But certainly, I think the idea or the inspiration for PCIJ started in the 1980s, when most of us were laboring in a niche in the dog pound that was the Marcos-controlled press. The restrictions were particularly severe after 1983, after the assassination of Benigno Aquino. But it was also a time of great hope for Philippine democracy, and a time of great hope for eventually a free press in the Philippines. We certainly had high hopes. And, you know, when EDSA happened, the press was free overnight. We were idealistic young journalists with great dreams of what we could do without freedom. Unfortunately, many of those hopes were not shared by the editors and the newspaper owners that we worked with. And their notions of what constituted journalism were not the same as ours. I think Malu, Lorna, and I had walked out of 3 newspapers in 3 years between 1986 and 1988. And some of these people had done the same thing. This was clearly not a sustainable model for doing journalism. Walking out. So it became clear. I remember one of our founders, Peter Roy, who's a writer, antique dealer, and man of the world, in one of the few meetings where he actually made it on the day of the meeting because Pete had a hard time telling the difference between Tuesday and Thursday. In one of our meetings, Pete said, you know, he was blowing smoke rings in the air. These were the days my young nephews and nieces are young. In those days, you could smoke in restaurants. And he said, we have to stop doing this or we will be known as home wreckers. I remember that distinctly, and so we really had no choice. There were a lot of newspapers in the Philippines at that time, which would eventually run out if we kept walking out on them. And so we needed to establish our own home. And our first real home was in a borrowed office, thanks to Roger Nieto. And we put together, I don't know if Lorna, you remember this, we each put together 1,000 pesos. That was a lot of money then. And with that money, we bought second-hand chairs and second-hand desks. We had a second-hand IBM selector. Remember those things with the tight walls where you can change the type? We have italics, times Roman. We had those were very considered very fancy then. And we had one DOS-based computer, the one with the green flickering lights. That was all we had. We had no fax machine and we had no telephone because in those days you couldn't buy a SIM card from the sari-sari store. You had to bribe. Had to pay a lot of money to get a landline. I think our first 2 years, we didn't even have our own telephone. Can you imagine a journalism organization running without its own phone? I wish Moni's Berto were here. It's really ironic that Moni's now is smart. Because Mon was... we used Mon's telephone, the phone in Mon's office and the fax machine, other things in Mon's office. But what we had was some of the best journalists of that era. And we were all united in one thing. We knew we were meant for better things. Better things than what the mainstream media could then offer. From the beginning, PCIJ was not meant to replace what mainstream newspapers and TV networks were doing. What it wanted to do was to help build a culture for accountability journalism in the country. We had the talent to be able to do it. Lorna Calajo was there. She and I were the taong bahay in the office. We couldn't have asked for a better editor and guide. We had, and I can say this because he's not here, we had the younger and wiser, definitely wiser Bobby Tiglan. We had Manumana's Javi Severino, Martes, Vito, Vito. Can you see this on tape? Hi, Bobby. Stella Leon, Eric Domelinda, we had Desmina Kiza fighting for us in Palau, Harry Elias in Davao. We had the wisdom of not just one Pete, but two, including Pete Lacaba, who helped edit and guide us in the early years. Cecil Barros has been our editor for a long time, I think since the 90s. Our early contributors included Glenn De Gloria, Ceres Doyo, Joan Mulipon, Chris Yabes, with Alex Pavico, David Sudran, Manolo Quezon, Luis Rimbani, Control writing for us, and we had to support the media community. People like Chacha Lasbar, who she's left already. And editors of major newspapers. We also had lawyers spanning the entire spectrum. I think PCIJ is the only client that both Romy Capulong and Dindo de los Angeles, who was president of the Philippine Stock Exchange, had in common. In between that, we had Heidi Rock, William Chua, Feli Arroyo, Lali Cairo with us, Margaret Leon and Chaldono all gave us legal advice. We got a lot of unsolicited advice as well. We had photographers, some of the best ones. Is Sunny Abao here? Yes, Sunny Abao. Dr. Kimura, Melvin Calderon, Sino Nanda, Alex Baluyut, Eric Soriano, and sorry if I can see you, and of course, through a very long period, the greatest cartoonist, Nonoy Marcelo. Yeah. And we had donors who took the chances with us. Steve Root is here. I want to tell you that the Asia Foundation gave us our first grant. And Steve Golub, who was our grants officer at the time, said, this was the riskiest grant that I had ever given. I don't know how we conned him into giving us money, but it certainly helped because for the first year we had no money. I had no salary. We had one paid staff whom we underpaid badly, but she has forgiven me for that. So many more people. It really takes a barangay, it takes a village to build an investigative reporting center. It wouldn't have existed without the support of so many people, too many to name. Looking back, 1989 may not have been the most auspicious year to start an investigative reporting center. And I should note that Melinda Jesus started the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility in the same year. CMFR is also celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. Thank you for all the JPO awards, Melinda. But 1989 was the year of the Tiananmen Massacre. The year before, the Burmese military crushed the flowering of democracy and imprisoned Aung San Suu Kyi. It was also, if you remember, the year of the most destructive coup ever, when US fighter planes had to be called in to protect the government of Korea. It was also the year the Soviet Union collapsed. It was the year the Berlin Wall fell. In the Philippines and elsewhere, it was a tumultuous time. Paradoxically, it was also a good time to start an investigative reporting center. It was a good time to open up the government to scrutiny. This was us. So PCIJ was actually the child of a revolution. We would not have existed if EDSA had not happened. And it was the institutions and the laws and the Constitution promulgated after people power that made it possible for us to do journalism that held the powerful to account. I remember I had a battered copy of the Constitution that was in my desk drawer because I had to keep consulting. The rules were new. We were a new democracy. We didn't know what the rules were. I had to consult it every time. What were the rules? What was the power of the Supreme Court? What was Congress authorized to do? And I remember reading the impeachment rules when we were doing the Estrada stories and realizing to my horror, oh my God, he can be impeached. I didn't know because of the stories that we were writing. So when Mr. Gisa is not here, I would like to thank him and Joby Salonga for RA 6713. That number will forever be imprinted in my mind. That's the Code of Conduct for Government Officials, which makes mandatory the disclosure of assets and liabilities. This document has been crucial to PCIJ investigations, not just to us, but to other investigations conducted from Mayor Sanchez to Renato Corona to Joseph Estrada and Lorena. Without disclosure laws, our work would have been much harder. This was the time people were engaged in debating the future of our democracy. This was the time when the military was still learning the rules of the game. This was the time when people were interested, and so we had an audience for our reporting. Because of the repression during the Marcos era, people also valued the role of an independent press that would act as a monitor of power. We were all, I'd like to think that PCIJ's trajectory follows the trajectory of Philippine democracy. In 1989, Philippine democracy was a toddler, somewhat self-destructive, stumbling, learning how to walk, really falling out of windows. Those early years were the years of re-establishing democratic institutions, Congress, independent judiciary, and reining in the power of the military. We were there, chronicling it as it happened. Our first book was on military adventurism. We were there, we still are, in Philippine democracy's extended and somewhat, how should I say, testosterone-charged adolescence. Its hormones are raging, searching for meaning and direction. This is a democracy that's torn apart between atavistic and destructive and reformist tendencies. We see the struggles between the politics of gradation and patronage on one hand, and the politics of reform. These tensions exist in all major institutions, whether it's the Supreme Court, the Congress, or the office of the President, or within political parties, even within the same individuals. You see them being torn apart by these two divisions, reform or patronage and tradition. Over the years, PCIJ stories reflected these struggles and these tensions. Our stories reflected the challenges of Philippine democracy, the military, protecting the environment, having an independent judiciary, having accountable democratic institutions, cleaning up and having more effective local governments, reining in corruption. We've also investigated the media, including corruption in the media and the unrelenting chase for advertising vessels. If we've had some success, it was also thanks to the likes of Joseph Estrada, Gloria Arroyo, assorted congressmen, Supreme Court justice, political families like the Angkatwad clan have given us countless stories to dig into and countless more undoubtedly in the future. But if PCIJ is the child of the revolution, we are now in the throes of another revolution. This one is not am I speaking too fast? I'm well aware that I'm the only one standing between you and dinner. This is why I'm speaking. Is it too fast? It's okay. All right. Okay. So we are now in the throes of another revolution. Oh, sorry. If EDSA was a political revolution, we are now in the midst of a technological revolution. But this revolution is a global one. So It's a revolution that consists of redefining what journalism is, who is a journalist, what a story is, how it can be told, what are the sources of information, and how information can be disseminated. In the nearly 30 years since EDSA, the media has flourished as a business and as a power player. This is truest in television. This is truly the golden age for free TV in the Philippines. It's a golden age, if not in quality, at least in profits. Never before in the history of Philippine TV has the audience or the advertising profits been so large. This will not happen again. The power of television, both in influencing public opinion as well as in making money, is unprecedented. Never in the history of Philippine media has the media been so pervasive and so truly mass. Today, that power is being threatened by new technology. Power of big media, whether newspapers or big TV or big radio, is now being threatened by new media. And I liken it, my mother's hometown is Bacolod, Pampanga, and I sort of, the metaphor in my mind, when I think about what is happening to the media landscape now, sort of post-volcanic eruption landscape. Things that the ground is shifting beneath our feet. In Pampanga, what were once lowland became highland, what were rivers became dryland. So this is what is happening now. There's a shift in power in the media. We see in the US, we've seen this with major newspapers, Pulitzer Prize-winning newspapers, more than 100-year-old newspapers closing down. 15,000 journalists in the US lost their jobs between 2008 and 2011 after both the technological change, because both the technological change and the economic crisis. We have now new players like BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, social media, outstripping traditional sources of news. It's different from country to country. In the US and in Japan, certainly new media players and social media has outstripped traditional sources, but traditional brands are holding their own in Scandinavia and in the UK. So far in the Philippines, the big brands are still holding their own, but there is room for disruption. There's room for disruptors. They cannot rest so easily having both the power and the money that they've had in the past. It's true, what is changing now is, it's a cliche, but it's true. Our competition is the audience. Everyone is now a journalist. The traditional roles the journalists have played, informing, verifying, witnessing, sex-making, watchdog, are no longer just played by professional journalists. Everyone is doing this. Whether it's in the US or places like the Ukraine, Syria, or Egypt, social media are now the primary carriers of breaking news. Sources can go directly to readers without the need for media mediation. News sources, even the Pope, breaks news on Facebook or Twitter. News is ubiquitous. It's all around us. You no longer have to wait until 6 in the evening to watch the newscast. It's all around you. It's 24/7. And it's social. Readers share. You don't go to the site. Young readers no longer go to the site of the newspaper or a TV network. They go on Facebook or Twitter and see what their friends are reading. News is no longer just written and distributed by newsmen, or I was in that era when they called women journalists news heads. I was at the tail end of that era. So newsmen and news heads, or newscasts and news heads, no longer have a monopoly of breaking news. Gwyneth Paltrow announces her breakup on her blog. The death of Bin Laden first leaks out through Twitter. They didn't wait for journalists to break the news. The first few videos of Typhoon Yolanda came from storm chasers who would come from GMA 7 or ABS-CBN. So our competition in informing, verifying, putting context in the news is not other journalists. It's citizens, it's NGOs, it's government officials who want to put out, it's everybody. We are competing with everyone because everyone can now commit acts of journalism. We are no longer dependent even in the sense-making, in providing context and background and expertise. Experts are on the web. If I want to know about Syria, I will go to the International Crisis Group, or go to a cooperative of journalists that run a website called Syria TV that covers it much more covers the country much more intensively than the New York Times or the BBC. In addition, much of the information that we have in Syria is not actually gathered by correspondents on the ground, because correspondents are forbidden there. Much of the videos is from citizens, ordinary citizens shooting video, uploading it on YouTube. YouTube is a major news source. So GMA, Howie, is competing not with ABS-CBN, but it's competing with YouTube and other sources of news. Even the watchdogging space, which needs a little bit more professional expertise, is now being occupied by non-journalists. There are people who watch specific areas, whether it's the environment or law enforcement, etc. We are, if you want to know more about this, many of these ideas are from a booklet that was produced by the Tao Center for Digital Media at Columbia University. Just Google post-industrial journalism, and it describes the changes that are taking place. We are really in a post-industrial landscape, meaning that the media are no longer organized according to their proximity to the machinery of production, no longer attached to printing presses or TV transmitters, because all you need is a tablet, a mobile phone, and you can transmit news. It's really, really changed. And this is a quote that I like. It says, this is from a protester in Turkey. We all use Twitter and we ask ourselves, do we really need microphones and that plays on the name of the TV station to let people know what's happening? And what is the answer to that question? The answer is no, because people can broadcast directly to the audience, and the audience, because of the internet, is people. Just as a thought experiment, I thought just to demonstrate to you the new ways of, this is what's happening now in the media. We have new freedoms, new platforms for publishing, new ways of presenting information, new ways of reaching out to audiences, new ways of getting audiences engaged and involved, etc., etc. I'll talk more about this. But as a thought experiment, I thought I would look at how would we investigate Joseph Estrada today. We did our investigation, PCIJ did its investigation of Joseph Estrada in 2000 and 2001. And we relied at that time on the secret of investigative reporting, his interns. We had interns from UP and other schools. To get corporate records, you need to line up. And you can only get 3 records from the SEC in a day. So we had this army of interns who we asked to line up. So that was what we did. Painstaking, document-based research. How would we do this now? How would we investigate Estrada today with all the technological resources that are available to us? So this was our investigation. For those of you, my nephews and nieces are here in 2001, we are still very young. Our investigation of Joseph Estrada was, we found that, among the things that we found was 70, he had acquired through dummies and front companies 17 properties worth $2 billion pesos. We used, as I said, painstaking review of land records. How we would have done it now? When we started Estrada, we started with rumors. And there was very little we could do with rumors. But now I saw with the Napoles investigation, people went to Facebook and Twitter and looked at what the Napoles daughter was posting, showing evidence of an extravagant lifestyle. In the past, we had to stake out and look at the cars parked in front of the mistresses of Estrada's home to see, that there was, I forget now, but the fancy cars there, trace the license plate number. But a lot of times, people just do this. They post evidence of their lifestyle. So we would use social media. We definitely mine social media for the postings of the Estrada wives, children, extended families. What else could we do? This is a Google Earth picture of the swimming pool of Tanchway, with the former head of the junta in Burma. There were some Burmese activists who were in exile in Thailand, and they used Google Earth to take photos of the secret cabin that Tanchway had built. This was Tanchway's swimming pool. I remember when we were investigating Estrada's house, we couldn't go near because the fences were so high. And the closest we got to was the MRT. Melvin, ikaw ba yun? MRT in front of MRT station, in front of Watchdog, to try and get an aerial photo of the stupendous 200 million peso Watchdog mansion. We could do that. Now we could use Google Earth. And journalists and activists all around the world are using Google Earth to look at places that they would not otherwise be accessible to them. This is a map made by an activist of the land owned by the royal family of Bahrain. We can also use drones. This is very controversial, but this is just a thought experiment. But this is actually footage from a drone that was taken by a Chinese activist and put on YouTube. And it's the home of Zhu Kongyang, who's the former security chief, a member of the CPP Politburo, who was alleged to have amassed something like $160 million of illegal wealth. You know, not much different from our own politicians. But what they did was, this was a house that his son built. They sent a drone and flew it over, and they just put out the video on YouTube without much comment. That doesn't prove anything. No, as a piece of investigative reporting, it's not great, but what other journalists did was they followed up on tracing, as everywhere, you know, wealth is kept in the hands of the family. So it was important. Wherever you go, China, Bosnia, South Africa, Russia, look at family members, because that's where officials hide the wealth. So what these reporters in the New York Times did is they had to find who the family members were of Xu Yongkang. And in China, if you're buried, all your family members are there etched in. The names are etched in stone, in tombstones. So the reporters decided this is where the cemetery is. They look at the tombstones and trace the family, and then use public records. A lot of them online. So back in the day when we were lining up with the SEC, even in China, the records are online. You were able to trace the family connections and the wealth of families. So even somewhere as secretive as Iran is not immune to being opened up. You know, the internet drives a wedge. There's a wedge of information that journalists can use for that. This is an investigation by Reuters of the wealth of the Ayatollah Khamenei. And what they did here was they scraped a website of a land. When you sell property, you put it up on an auction, and all the property listings are there in auction. What they did was they scraped, meaning they automatically downloaded all the information from that website and found the land sales made by a company that was linked to the Ayatollah. And they found, you know, immense, I think it was like $100 billion worth of property. But that's how they did it. And believe it or not, they also used LinkedIn. Are you members of LinkedIn? Yeah. It's the surest way to find sources of information. So what they did is they searched for companies related to the Iranian ruling government, and they found sources of information and systematically called them one by one. Okay. But that doesn't mean that in the Philippines, SEC records are still not digitized. So it's still going to be difficult to do this, and there's still no substitute. I'm not saying that the internet is a substitute for hardcore reporting. Hardcore reporting still needs to be done. What technology provides us is new tools to do it more efficiently in far less time, requiring far less resources. So we still use corporate records in ERA, but now countries around the world are digitizing corporate records. And this is a site based in the UK called Open Corporates. Here, they scrape the websites of the public registries that are online. So you could search for any name of any person in the world. Try searching Juan Ponce and leave it there, as I did. And you will find holdings that he has in, I won't tell you which country, you have to do the work yourself. But you can search by country and by name here. You don't have to go to each jurisdiction. You don't have to go to the Panama registry, which is online, and they will leave us and scrape it. Making that more efficient. We have here, this is the investigative dashboard. This is run by an investigative reporting outfit that's based in Sarajevo. What they do is they provide links to corporate registers, and they also allow people to, they help people do research. So what is happening now is there's a lot of collaboration. We live in a world that is more collaborative and competitive, especially investigative reporting. So you can ask them for their help, and they have all their resources for data that you can look at to trace land and corporate ownership wherever in the world. Because in this era, wealth crosses borders. It used to be that Estrada just kept his wealth in the Philippines. But I think the more sophisticated officials, both here and elsewhere, are now putting their wealth overseas. So increasingly knowledge of where to hunt for wealth outside the Philippines is important for investigative journalists. So some sort of cross-border knowledge is now key to doing investigative reporting. This is one of the characteristics of this era as far as investigative reporting is concerned. This is the era of massive digital leaks. We saw this in WikiLeaks, we saw this in the Snowden documents, we saw this in, this is a story on offshore leaks. PCIJ was one of the partners in this by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. They got a mass of documents from some offshore agencies that were putting up these shell companies, and they made a searchable database. So increasingly now we need the ability to be able to structure and analyze data and find the information we need in that data. I'll show you very quickly. I promised 40 minutes, am I? Okay, so Marcos, remember him? So I was a reporter in 1986. I was with Monis Berto covering PCGG and Editor Dicillas and Daisy Mandel. And we would encounter documents like this. This is a document of the Swiss bank card. But where Ferdinand Marcos uses the name William Saunders to open a Swiss bank account. There were tons of documents like this, and reporters couldn't even begin to analyze the wealth of the material that was found in the presidential palace in Malacanang after Marcos left. I went to the PCGG last year and I asked to see their documents, and it's in a room as big as this, and it's all on paper. Try to get a sense of what happened during the Marcos era. You have, without the use of technology, it would be very hard to make sense of all of that. So now we have new tools that allow us to be able to crunch large document sets and find patterns and find stories in them. So when this happened in Ukraine, this is overview. This is one of the tools, this is done by a colleague of mine at the Journalism School at Columbia. What it does, it's too complicated to explain, but look it up. What you can do is you can upload digitized documents there, including PDFs, and it will tease out common patterns like words or the associations between words in these documents. You're able to analyze. You don't have to read 10,000 pages. You can just choose which documents you want to read, but it's a document analysis software. So when Yanukovych, like Marcos, fled in a hurry from Ukraine after a popular uprising, literally crowds, knocking on the gates of the presidential palace, he dumped all his papers in the lake, in a pond nearby. And so what a group of journalists did was they dried the papers in the sauna out of the presidential palace. And so first of all, they dove. They sent volunteer divers to dive for the papers. They dried them in the sauna, and then they got scanners to digitize them and put them together, and then allowed people to then, each of them, they divided the work among themselves, because you can do this now. You can put with cloud computing, you put a lot of material online, and they were able to, in real time, make sense of the documents. If we had this after 1986, we would have been much more efficiently able to report on and keep track of the Marcos wealth and the wealth of the This is Ben Ali, the former president of Tunisia, and that's his Imelda Marcos, the first lady. So at that time in Tunisia, it was very difficult to get information about what was going on in the family. So what one blogger in Tunisia did was he looked at plane spotting websites. So there are people who do nothing but take pictures of planes as they land and as they take off. They're called plane spotters, and if you Google plane spotters, last time I counted there were like over 200 plane spotting websites where people just upload these photos. So what this guy did was he just got the tail number of the presidential plane of the Tunisian president's plane, and you can search these websites by the tail number. The tail number is the number of the tail, that's why it's called the tail number. But it's like the license plate of the plane. You can, when you go to the sites, you can search for photos of the planes and the dates and times when places where those photos were taken. So he was able to compile just from these amateur websites the names, the dates where the presidential plane went. The only problem was Ben Ali never went anywhere because he has a fear of flying. So who was using the planes? It was the First Lady because she liked to shop. And so most of the destinations were places like Paris, Geneva, Milan, where she could go shopping. So they were able to put this together, just that, and put like a very cool video online, very much like our Estrada story. How, you know, what was Estrada? Can Estrada explain his wealth? This is something more like, where did the Republic of Tunisian airplane go? So just asking questions from what we call digital exhaust. You know, this is all the material people post online, whether they're Twitter messages, Instagram photos and Flickr, mining that information, getting things that people voluntarily make public can yield some really, really interesting stories. And of course, Abu Ghraib is also sort of citizen journalism, except just into the media, where it shows, you know, that people take pictures of everything, and that you can, and Filipinos especially. The art of the extreme selfie. I've seen such weird contortions the last couple of weeks that I've been here. People can take pictures of themselves, but there's a wealth of material in those pictures for all kinds of stories. Okay, so let me just go, some things that can be done. This is Info Amazonia. I urge you to visit the site. This is what they call collaborative geojournalism. They're uploading maps and data on maps and places to keep track of forest destruction in the Amazon. This is a cooperative run by journalists and NGOs in 6 countries covered by the Amazon. And 9 countries covered, and the data, they make the data available for download, they share, they compare, and they map it together. So again here, they're able, by just mapping, see new correlations, correlations between the flow of people and the destruction of the forest. So they're able to see relationships you would otherwise not see by just using documents and by interviewing people. Visualizations as story. Now stories are not just text, they are visualized. Visualized as data or as graphics or sophisticated interactives. This is a site called Oxpeckers. It keeps track of animal poaching in several countries in Africa. Most definitely worth looking at. This is a site, I'm sorry, it's not so clear here. This is Connected China. Former student of mine worked on this. This is a little bit like the ties that bind and the rule makers. Most of this collective action is organized, as it says, toward a not. Towards a no, not a goal. It's easier to mobilize when opposing something when really done something. These are the same problems we had. You know, we knew this coming out of 1986. It's easier an era. It's easier to topple a government. It's harder to rebuild a reformist, a long-lasting reformist government afterward. So this is the problem we continue to face, whether it's old media or new media. The shallowness of media-propelled collective action. I think we need to rethink about how we can bring about long-term structural reforms. Back in 1903, this legendary editor, S.S. McClure, who was an editor of McClure's magazine, which published Ida Tarbell and the other mapmakers like Lincoln Stephens, he was said to be the most brilliant editor that's, what is it? He was said to be the most gifted windbag who ever sat on an editor's chair. We know about windbags who sat in an editor's chair. He was the most gifted windbag. This was 1903, and there have been others since. But this is what he said. The vitality of democracy depends on the popular knowledge of complex questions. And this was true in 1903, it's still true now. especially as governance becomes more complex and the issues that we face become more complex. So even more now, as we face the challenges brought about by new technologies, new ways of doing things, we need more than ever journalists as well as citizens who can help the public understand complex questions. And I hope that PCIJ will continue to keep doing that in the next 25 years. And I hope to be here, even in a wheelchair, PCIJ's 50th anniversary. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat.